Trump has unveiled the biggest shakeup in global trade since the Second World War. What the US president called Liberation Day, and one of the most important days in American history, was also a day of reckoning for how countries and companies around the world do business. Millions were glued to the TV screens, squinting at a placard that was blowing in the wind in the White House Rose Garden. This placard listed the hefty tariffs that would be introduced overnight, and was the first clue that the world had about what was happening next.
United Kingdom 10%, and we'll go 10%. So we'll do the same thing.
The UK has been hit by a 10% tariff, what the White House calls the baseline rate, on all goods imported into the United States. But it's bad news for British car makers, as Trump confirmed all foreign car imports will be subject to a further 25% tariff. The US imports about £60 billion worth of British goods, fractionally more than the $57 billion the UK imports from America. The UK has been given the lowest rate of tariff. By comparison, China has been hit with a 34% reciprocal tariff. This is half the 67% rate Trump claims China charges US importers. However, added to that existing rate of tariffs on China, it takes the levy up to 50%. Vietnam, where many Western companies have factories, will now face a 46% tariff. Japan has been hit with a 24% tariff, and Taiwan faces 32% tariff. The EU will also face a 20% tariff, higher than the UK. In effect, a tariff is a tax on foreign goods coming into a country. It's paid by the company which imports goods to the country's government. Most tariffs are set as a percentage of the value of goods. Typically, it makes the price of the product more expensive, as that tariff is just passed straight on to consumers. Tariffs have the specific purpose of giving homegrown companies an advantage over foreign producers trying to sell goods in a market. Trump has raged for years about the unfairness of other countries slapping taxes on the import of goods, with the EU a particular target of his rage after flooding the American market with BMWs and Mercedes cars. Last night he stepped up his attack, accusing countries of looting, raping and pillaging America. Trump believes that introducing tariffs will encourage more companies to build factories in America to avoid tariffs, and that US consumers will be more likely to buy made-in-America products if they are cheaper as a result. He reckons that these tariffs will make America wealthy again. Well, Britain's already fragile growth will almost immediately be dented by all this uncertainty. The budget watchdog has previously warned it could wipe out UK economic growth by 1% and destroy the £9.9 billion headroom so carefully reinstated by the Chancellor Rachel Reeves just last week. This could mean further tax rises or even further deeper spending cuts. The stock markets, which many of our pension funds invest in, have also tanked this morning. London's FTSE 100 index sank by 1%, the FTSE 250, which ranks mid-cap sized list companies, was down by 0.82%. European stock markets in France and Germany fell even more heavily, and in Japan the Nikkei index dropped by 2.77%. In short, a sea of flashing red lights on global stock markets. Meanwhile, more investors are piling into gold, which is seen as a much safer asset, and prices are back at record highs of over $3,100 an ounce. One word: pain. Tariffs are a nightmare for business because it makes the flow of goods around the world much more expensive. And as we found out from the hangover of the pandemic, any snarl in supply chains leads to prices soaring. Companies that also make products in countries like Vietnam, China, India and Thailand, which are now whacked with higher tariffs, will also have to hike prices to cover the higher costs. Analysts reckon that sports brands, which include the likes of Nike, Adidas, Puma, all the favourites, will have to hike prices in the US by a whopping 20% in order to defend their products. It's impossible to think that there won't be a knock-on in the UK too. That means more expensive trainers. Shares in all the sports brands have tumbled this morning. There is, though, the counter-argument that goods could become cheaper as companies divert products that were meant for the US to the UK. But in the long term, the big risk is that this so-called diversionary trade ends up flooding our market with cheap imports. That would ruin British homegrown companies who can't compete and cost thousands of jobs. The British government is betting it still might be able to negotiate better terms with Trump. Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds this morning indicated it had a package of measures which is thought to include sweeteners such as lower taxes for US tech giants and trade deals on US food and drink. Trump has signalled these tariffs are a starting point to negotiations, but last night he was quite clear. The only route to zero tariffs is to drop tariffs on US imports. Currently, the UK still charges the US 10% imports on items such as oranges grown in Florida.